Working in a hybrid or fully remote setup comes with many positive opportunities, but it can also be challenging, especially when transitioning into this new way of working. That is why the mental health startup Likeminded is dedicated to providing mental health and well-being support to people in remote and hybrid work setups. Today, I am speaking with Likeminded Co-CEO Kimberley Breuer to hear about their mission statement and what well-being looks like in a remote or hybrid workspace. And I also want to know what skills the workforce of tomorrow will need to thrive in our new world of work. Thank you for joining us on the State of Work podcast, Kimberley. Where are you joining us from today?
Hi, Sandra. Very nice to meet you and to be here today. I'm joining from Berlin, from our office space, actually.
Yeah, awesome. That's actually my hometown. I don't know if I've shared this on this podcast before, but I'm originally from Berlin. Well, can you tell our listeners what your head office is, what it is that you do, and how you came to do what you do now?
Yes, of course. So I'm one of the founders of a mental health startup, and we are providing mental health support, especially for employees. So it's a mental health solution in companies where employees can get psychological support in different formats, from one-on-ones and group sessions, but also in digital exercises. And I'm myself, by background, a psychologist and also educated coach. And I've been working as a trained coach even before founding Likeminded. And that was also one of the main reasons I started this company, because I realized that the status quo around mental health in our society hasn't really changed in the last 10 years. And there's still a lot of room for improvement. And our mission with Likeminded is really to reach as many people as possible with this topic in order to support them, to really create a fulfilling life, but also to prevent any mental illnesses.
Yeah, so is that dedicated towards specifically employees and people in a employment background, or open for anyone who's looking for support?
It's only dedicated to companies and employees. We actually even started in the B2C market, but realized quite soon that the willingness to pay for such services, especially in Europe, where everything is usually paid by the government or insurances, is not really there yet. So this is why we went through B2B2C then, and are now reaching more people than before.
Yeah, wow, fascinating. And did you, I would assume you've seen kind of a spike throughout the COVID years. I feel like it's kind of shifted the whole mental health and well-being topic a bit more into the focus point for a lot of people.
So since we actually started within COVID, we weren't really able to see a spike because there was just really quite high demand. I think what I've seen, especially because I was working as a psychologist beforehand also with companies, is that the mindset of companies has changed a lot during COVID times. Yeah, so the awareness for the topic and the openness to actually invest into solutions has increased significantly through the pandemic.
Yeah. So something that we want to focus on in our chat today is how we can support or how companies and employers can support their employees in a hybrid work setting. So especially when you don't always have access to that employee, it might be a little bit harder to check in because you're not always in the same space, and people can feel isolated. And we want to make sure that we differentiate between hybrid and remote teams, because fully remote is a whole nother ball game and comes with its own type of challenges. So, what is some advice that you would give employers who are looking to support people that are in a hybrid work situation?
Yes. So I think, first of all, this really starts with the right education, especially when it comes to the topic of mental health. Most of us are quite uneducated. Yeah. So it's nothing we learn in school, even though it's so fundamental to all of us, which is why I would definitely suggest to, first of all, start with education around the topic of mental health. And then in the next step, really educate the people around the setting of working remotely versus working in an office space next to your colleagues, and then educating them about what impacts that have on your mental well-being. Yeah. Because there are certain factors that can increase your mental well-being within the remote work, but there are also certain factors that can potentially harm your mental well-being while working remotely. And I think the very first step is to inform about it and educate people. because then you're enabling them to really take responsibility for themselves and realize, okay, what do I actually need in order to feel mentally well when I'm working remotely?
Yeah. Is that something that you focus on as well, to get research and get feedback from employees and actually learn what is it that they need? How can we support them best?
Yes, for sure. So, of course, we've been collecting data around those things and also doing surveys. So how were you doing during COVID times? How is working remotely for you? And then we were offering also a lot of information sessions, like expert webinars around the topic. And what we've seen is that most of the people really underestimated the negative impact of working remotely on their mental well-being. Because in the first place, and I think that we can speak for ourselves here probably, in the first moment, most of us thought, wow, we have so much autonomy right now. It's so great to be like the owner of our own time, to work from home, to skip the way to work. So there were a lot of positive aspects around it. But after a while, people realized more and more that the social part was missing a lot. Really interacting with your colleagues face to face. And this is also known in psychological research as one of the most important factors to release stress, also to compensate for stress. So there are different compensation mechanisms to decrease that stress or balance your stress in a better way. And one of these is definitely also the social support system and the social interaction. And that was, of course, completely lost during COVID times. And people just realized after a while, wow, this is really lacking. And I'm sitting here isolated just by myself. And this is, of course, something where you just saw the effects after a while. And the second part is definitely that the difference of the distance between my work and my private life has become very blurry. And that's definitely also another aspect that a lot of people underestimated in the beginning.
Yeah. What can we do to make sure that we don't fall into these two traps? Or like one trap is the separating your home office from your private life and not falling into working the whole time, or even just thinking about work the whole time. And also, how can we create social interactions when we are working in a hybrid or even fully remote setting?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the first part is definitely about your own private setup at home. So this is really about having the right structure, the right setup. Do you maybe have even a separate room from which you can work? That's a different room to where you sleep, for example. This is, of course, the best scenario. Not for everyone this is possible, but I think the setup can be optimized for many people. That's the first part, but then also really setting boundaries and routines for yourself. So really defining, okay, when do I stop working? Where do I not open my computer, my laptop, for example? I know a lot of people who really came up with own rules and said, I will never take my laptop into my bedroom, for example. I just don't do that anymore. So here I think it's a lot about setting your own structures and rules. And then the second part about interacting socially, even in a virtual environment, I think this is something where especially the employers have to take a lot of responsibility and really create situations, virtual events, but also check-ins, like mental check-ins. How are you doing with all those people working remotely? For example, at Likeminded, we are having an informal check-in every Wednesday afternoon, where people just come together for 15 minutes. It's not a lot of time, and just have a check-in round. Sometimes they play a quick game. They just check in with each other. How are you doing? So really creating these spaces in order to make them socially connect other than just talking about business.
Yeah. I think connection is the core point here, because I can imagine individuals or employees starting to work on these things and setting their own rules, but at the same time, you kind of have to communicate certain rules to your employer as well, and they have to accept these rules and they have to obey them as well. I'm thinking about, especially when you're working over different time zones, or even not, just, when and how do I reply to emails? When we're working in a hybrid setting, or I'm home officing today, how available do I have to be in, communication channels such as Slack or Teams? And I think bringing these two parts together is the real core and difficult thing, because every single individual has a different understanding of what a good, proper rule looks like for them. So how can employees and employers work together and start these conversations? Because I can imagine it's quite a difficult one to have with your employer sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in general, and this can also be a suggestion by the employee towards the management, is, for example, coming together for a workshop around the topic of working remotely, and creating really a workshop jointly, maybe just with a first small team, but then even extending it to the bigger team, in which you really brainstorm together about how can we make working remotely most effective and most efficient. And this is, for example, also something that we have done. So it's not like us as the founding team came up with all the ideas, but actually all our employees brought up those ideas. For example, working with Slack status emojis, really putting an emoji into your Slack status to show I'm currently in a focus time, I'm currently in a super good mood. People even using emojis to show, hey, I'm approachable right now, or just don't annoy me right now. So I think there are a lot of ideas that people will come up with. I would definitely say it's worth it to have a joint workshop and a joint discussion about it, because the management most of the time also doesn't have all the answers. And as you said, it's really a joint work, since also we are all very in the beginning, right? In terms of working remotely. There's so much yet to learn. And I think that's the second very important part, to have also a lot of understanding, but from both sides. From the employer side, to have the understanding that the employees also have to develop into being good remote workers, but also the employees understanding that the management also has to develop into being good remote employers. So I think all of us have a way to go, and it's all about communication and working together on this topic.
Yeah. How important is a remote work policy, or just generally probably a mission statement or a value statement around these topics for a company to really set out and incorporate some of these communication rules for both sides?
I would definitely do that. So I think the more transparent and the more clearer you communicate your remote policy, the easier it will become. Just talking about here and there about it won't help, and also won't set up the whole team to success and really succeed in working remotely. And this should be something that should be already shared in the onboarding, in best cases, to really say, hey, this is how we work remotely, and these are our rules to work remotely. For example, in the beginning, when this all started, and also we were going more and more remote because of COVID, we didn't have the best setup in the office. So usually we had meetings, some people were remote, some were in the office, and those people remotely in the beginning, they couldn't understand us very well. They couldn't, we didn't hear them too good. So they weren't really involved in the discussions. And these were then things that we optimized, of course. I think a lot of companies did, but it's also about really having a good technical setup to enable remote work, to include everyone, no matter whether they are there in person or just working remotely in a Zoom call. And I think these are things and rules that everyone has to write down and then tell everyone in the room, this is how we work remotely. This is how we involve everyone, no matter where they're based.
Yeah. One thing I find fascinating is that I saw on the Likeminded website, actually, that you offer group sessions as well, which I think is a brilliant way for bringing people together, especially in a remote setting, and making sure that people have these meaningful conversations and interactions, even if they can't have them with their team. Sometimes they might not want to have it with their team, if you're in an environment where you may not feel comfortable sharing. So what's the idea behind that? And do you offer that for employers as well, maybe who are looking for support to get some input into how to deal best with their employees?
So first of all, the idea around the group sessions was really to offer another psychological support format that's not one-on-one focused, and also leverage different success factors that can be only leveraged in a group setting. For example, bringing together people who would usually maybe never get the chance to talk to each other because they don't even know each other, but who are experiencing a similar situation, and bringing them together and making them realize it's not just you, but it's actually other people who are feeling similar. So this is really the whole idea about these group sessions. This is also where our name stems from, because we're connecting like-minded people in a group format. And it has beautiful, positive side effects to have those group sessions and discussions and exchange with people with different perspectives on a similar topic. And yes, it's one of our signature formats also for the employees. So we're having group sessions on different topics where people can really connect in those group sessions with people they have never seen beforehand. And of course, we are also offering that for leaders. So the leadership offer is being extended just right now, and we are, for example, having group sessions for female leaders. We have group sessions for difficult conversations as a manager with employees, and also, of course, topics like remote setting or working in a hybrid setup. So there are different topics, and yes, we're definitely making use of this to connect the people around it.
Yeah. You mentioned before that we're just getting started in this whole new work setup or remote work setup, and it's becoming increasingly more normal, but we still have to give each other time to really get used to this new way of working. So what's something that graduates or people who are just entering the work market can do to maybe mentally prepare themselves a little bit more for this new work environment?
That's a very good question. Maybe to give some context, I have experienced and talked also to rather junior people who are just entering the working environment a lot. And what I've seen is that most of them really were completely overwhelmed by the situation. At the same time, many of them entered working environment during COVID. And the first thing they got to know was working remotely. And when you talk to them, they realize quite soon that something was missing. For them, it must have felt like, this is how work is. Where's the fun part? But at the same time, of course, they got used to working remotely very from the beginning. So that's also an advantage. But I think especially for people just joining a new job, a new company, and this is something that we are also doing at Likeminded this way. In the very first weeks, I would always recommend to spend a lot of time in the office, to at least try to. Even though if you're usually based quite far away, maybe you can work with your employer, work out how you can spend the first weeks there. Because you get a different understanding of the dynamic of the team, of the culture. You understand a lot of things easier when you're not completely remote and when you are face-to-face with people. And I think from there, then really starting to understand what kind of personality am I? Through which channels do I get energy? For example, there are more extroverted persons who get energy from being with people. And for those people, it might make sense to really just work in a hybrid setting and not in a complete remote setting. And then for people who are rather introverted, for them, a complete or a rather remote setting could make a lot of sense. And I think it's really about learning a lot about yourself and testing the different environments. Try to test them for yourself. I think that's really my recommendation here. And the next part is communicate, rather over communicate. So if you're working remotely and you're just starting your job, there's so many things to learn, like how to structure yourself, how to organize your work, how to prioritize, and all those things that are sometimes easier learned when you're sitting next to someone more senior, because you can just kind of watch that person. Since you're not in the position when you're working remotely, I would really recommend over communicate. Ask as many questions as you have. Really have a lot of Zoom sessions in the beginning to understand as many things as possible, and don't be shy to ask for support, because especially when you're working remotely, it's a harder time. It takes a bit longer probably to understand all those first learnings that we have in our first jobs.
Yeah. I like the idea though that we're kind of breeding a new workforce that is way more in touch with how they do their best work, because productivity and efficiency looks different for everyone. So for example, I work very well in the mornings and I usually have a little drop of energy in the afternoons, and I struggle to get back into it after I go for my walk and have my lunch. And then again, I get active again in the evening. So that's something I've learned over time. That's just my times, how I work very well. There's other people who might, are completely different. They can't get started in the morning, but they prefer working late, or, they want to take a 2-3 hour lunch break and then they get back into it. So yeah, the remote settings and really planning and scheduling your own time, I think, can really bring out those individual needs and have a workforce that is just more in tune with what drives them to do their best work.
Yeah, definitely. And I loved how you say it, like being more in touch with what you need in order to be more productive. And at the same time, as a mental health founder, what of course pops up for me is also being more in tune with what you need to actually feel good, right? And I think that's an amazing chance, actually, that is now being opened, that people start understanding more, what do I need to feel good? Where are my boundaries? And I think this will create a way more sustainable workforce in the future.
Yeah, that's the perfect segue into our last question, which is, in your opinion, or even in your hopes, you can build up a dream scenario. What does the future of work look like? Will we all work remotely? Will we all work hybrid? Is it completely unrelated to place of work? What's the future of work?
For me, it's definitely a hybrid setup. That's my dream and hope, but also what I'm convinced about, that we will end up with a hybrid setting, because I'm personally an extroverted person and I love to be with people. So in the hard COVID times, for me, it was a super tough time to be isolated. So I would always hope for having also in the future companies with hybrid setups where I can actually engage and interact and connect with my employees, with my colleagues. And I do believe that many people are like this, not only extroverted people, but that actually all of us need some kind of human interaction and connection in a world that's anyways quite digitalized and anonymous right now. So I do believe that we create work cultures in the future of work where we kind of combine the best parts of each world, where we combine the best parts of being in an office together and really spending productive and present time with each other, and then also using the remote part to make us the most efficient and to also give all of us more flexibility and autonomy to kind of make our work life and our private life work better together. So I do believe it's the hybrid setup in the long term, and that people will need to understand even more what kind of personality are they, in which culture do they thrive and do their best work.
So being more mindful, I think, in a general setting is the key to success here. Fascinating. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about Likeminded, about your mission and your insights into what you found working with people, with employers, with employees. I think, we have a lot to learn still. Like you said, we all still need a little bit of time, but there's so much opportunity, so many positive chances for this. And it's great to have companies and founders like yourself who are working on bringing solutions and making this transition as smooth as possible. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sandra. It was a lot of fun being here.
The State of Work is a podcast by Lano. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to never miss a new episode, or find us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on Instagram or Twitter by searching for The State of Work. For more information about today's topic and our show notes, as well as all of our previous episodes, check out our website at lano.io/podcast. Thanks for listening, and until next time on The State of Work.